I didn't see you. How did your session go?
You know, we believe it went well. There are about 350 folks and from across the state, and I think we've gotten about 10 requests to go do the workshop in other places. So.
As I said, a good time to do implicit bias training.
Yeah. I reckon.
All right, and we are live on YouTube.
Thank you, Quinn.
Right. Let me see. A good representation here so far. Have we gotten any communique, Sister Laura or Judge Kaufman, on attendance or accountability?
I have not heard from anyone who says they can't be here.
Neither have I.
Now, Dr. Price, oh, she's on. Okay. All right. I do know she had a class the last time I talked to her, so, but she's on.
Okay. I'm gonna give it one more minute because we have a very robust final sort of meeting. All right, I'm showing 3 o'clock, so I'm going to get us rolling. So welcome to what is becoming the finale of at least this leg of the work of the Law Enforcement Justice and Accountability Subcommittee of the Mayor's Commission on Racial Equality here in Lexington, Fayette County. I also want to read the COVID statement so we can officially start. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the state of emergency, this meeting is being held via video teleconference pursuant to 2020 Senate Bill 150 and in accordance to KRS 61.826, because it's not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for our Monday, 23rd meeting minutes. Entertain approval of, 24th, Monday, the 24th meeting minutes. Entertain a motion for approval of those. So moved. Is there a second? There's a second. Moved and seconded. Is there any question? Hearing no question, all those in favor signify by aye. Opposed, like sign. Seeing none, minutes carry. Motion carries to approve the minutes. Let me start here and very swiftly transition to the work of the day. Judge Kaufman and myself, as this process nears, again, I won't say an end, but nears a conclusion of this component of it. We said the largest ticket item on the agenda today we needed to start with was gratitude to you. We have received from some of you all your appreciation of the process. We've received some appreciation of the process from the community at large. For Judge Kaufman and myself, we say all that appreciation really belongs to this committee. I actually say, I told Judge Kaufman, I love working with you. I get caught in the crossfire of all your compliments. And so really we're getting caught in the crossfire of compliments of the work that this committee's doing. It's what I believe is occurring. And not only gratitude to you for what you've done, but for what you've endured. Because I know that some of us have had to hear what feels like and sounds like aspersions cast at you and systems that you work with and for and lead. Also, some of you and some of us have had to hear some dissenting and potentially negative comments from the community at large. We know that. Thank you for enduring it. What we know is at the end of the day, we're working for the good of the human condition in this community, and we thank you guys for being part of the work. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and we will continue to do this work together. That said, we have a little more work to do on this leg of the race. And so Judge Kaufman is going to walk us through the recommendations that we have left to kind of prioritize and work through today. I'm going to try to share screen on things here, Judge. So.
Thank you, David. I want to start with the justice system recommendations, and I appreciate everybody putting up with all my emails the past 2 weeks as I've tried to get you to simplify your recommendations or consolidate them or withdraw them or whatever. I just wanted us to have as tight a document as possible. I want to start today with the justice system recommendations, and specifically, I want to turn first to the recommendations for the courts. You have received that. It's pretty close to what it was the last time, and I sent it to you about an hour and a half ago also. And I want to know, first of all, whether anyone is opposed to any of the recommendations for the courts. Any opposition, speak up, please, verbally. Okay. Is there any opposition to those recommendations going forward? Speak up. Judge Scorsone.
I don't have an opposition, but I wondered whether I've got a kind of a friendly amendment, and that is there's overlooking at the judges and probation and parole officers, and I think it would help the judges and the probation officers to participate in annual continuing education programs on implicit bias. I think it would help us, and I know the probation and parole officers don't have this locked into their current programming, and I think it would be a good recommendation that judges and probation and parole officers also do annual program on implicit bias.
Thank you, Judge Isaac. I know you wrote those recommendations for the courts. Will you accept that amendment?
Yes, I think that's a good amendment.
Mandatory annual. Okay, thank you. And then that recommendation will go forward. Judge
I had a question. I'm sorry. Yes, I did. I'm sorry. My question on the reflection of the court staff, is that the courthouse staff? Or are we talking about just the judge's staff? Just as specific.
Court personnel, we can clarify that, but you were talking about everyone, weren't you?
Yes, I was talking about actual hires by the judge's office and hires by the circuit clerk.
Okay.
Can you clarify that with a parenthetical, Judge Isaac?
Yes.
Okay. And I will say, because the courts have pretty much exclusive province to look at these recommendations and do something about it, I do want us to send these forward to the commission, but I will also take the liberty of sending these to the chief judges of the courts. I think Judge Bell is chief judge of the district court and Judge Bunnell is chief judge of the circuit court. And I will just let them know what we're doing. And I hope you, Judge Murphy and Judge Scorsone, as active judges, will encourage these to move forward in the same way the police office, the police department has moved forward on some of their recommendations.
Yes, ma'am. And would you be kind to send them to Chief Justice Minton as well?
Oh, that's a good idea. I will. I sure will. Okay.
Thank you.
Secondly, I want to move to the justice system recommendations for the prosecutor's office. And just so we could expedite things today, I took the liberty of writing to Ms. Baird this morning and asking her if they have any objections. And she has sent me those. And she has no objection to much of it. Ms. Baird, you want to speak to that?
Sure. And it was a little delayed. Literally, I got off the 10 o'clock docket at about 1:30. So sorry.
Okay.
And so probably the easiest ones to do are 2, 3, and 5 in consultation with Ms. Redcorn. We don't have an objection to those. And number 2, she indicated we're already doing those. I'm trying to look at my phone and her answers, so I don't remember exactly what they were. With respect to the first one, and I think it was looking at reviewing processes and different things like that, implementing a program such as various prosecution and racial justice program and things like that, which can potentially be very costly. What we have indicated is we generally don't have an objection to looking into that program, looking into partnering with other research programs and those types of things. The biggest thing that we wanted to make sure was clear was that if it's a budget issue and we don't have a say over where our budget comes from and where we get the money from, that comes from the unified prosecutorial systems. And so the only discretionary money we have comes from, we can use asset forfeiture for legitimate law enforcement purposes. So that may be a hurdle with that if it's something that requires funding. But generally, looking into that, we don't have an objection to that.
Okay, and number 4, I'll come back to that later because that one doesn't apply to you. How about the additional recommendations for Mr. Dunn?
I asked him about, I did send him an email separately about that to clarify some of those things. And the first one, I think, was a question similar, I think, about that, but funding. And if I remember correctly, Mr. Dunn, your response was that it was meant for the mayor to fund. Am I looking at the right one? But I think that was, you're on mute, but I think that was what my clarification was before those additional justice ones came out. It was asking specifically what it was referring to because the first draft was talking about some other things and charging or whatever. But I think he was clarifying that to say funding by the city. And so other than that, we don't have an objection or a disagreement with that.
Okay, is that right, Mr. Dunn, that you were talking about funding by the city on that additional recommendation number 1?
Yes. Would that be funded by the mayor's office? Could it be funded by the mayor's office?
Let me see. That is fund a specific effort to reduce Black and African American overrepresentation at all stages of the criminal justice process. Do you have any more specificity there, Mr. Dunn?
Well, actually, what I looked at and wanted to kind of change, I don't know if the prosecutor's office would be open to doing it, but when I was looking at, I guess, prosecutorial discretion, I was going to change to see if we could get it to where we could actually show how many people have reached and negotiated plea deals with prosecutors, details on initial offers, and then how offers change over time. And if plea deals vary with race, persons accused of a crime, prosecutors, or victims, and see if we could make those findings public. I don't know if that's something that can be done.
That
to work.
I did see that where he had written that on there. That would be a research project that would require funding because that's not, we generally do those types of things, but not to the detail and the depth that you're talking. And so we don't have a problem reviewing our systems, but to the detail that you're talking, it would probably require a major funding type thing. And so if we get funding about that somehow for what you're asking for, we generally probably don't have we don't have a position on it, I guess.
Mr. Dunn, after the meeting, if you can refine that, please, and shoot a copy to Mr. Cozart and me, as well as to the prosecutors and to Council Member Masadi with as much specificity as you can. We can take a look at it. Okay. All right.
I think that's what I sent to you all just, I think maybe a few hours ago.
Yeah, we just need to deal with what we actually already have done.
Okay.
And so if you're going to be more specific, you'll need to do that. Now, moving on, Ms. Bayard, let's see. The second recommendation by Mr. Dunn, you said you have no objection to that. You're already doing that and you will continue to do that, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
All right. Yeah, except for Mr. Oh, and I want to ask Ms. Minifield. Ms. Minifield, one of those recommendations, number 4, has to do with your office. The Fayette County Attorney's Office should consider broadening diversion program to include more offenders. And I think also it said that both offices earlier, somewhere here, it says that both offices should keep demographics on all this. And I know your office has not been doing that. Did your office have any problem with either of those, Ms. Minifield?
I can't really speak completely for the office, but I do know we have looked at our charges that go into diversion, and we look at that regularly. I mean, we have staff meetings and we discuss that regularly. So I don't think we're going to not discuss it, you know, but I can't make a commitment that we're going to change it. But I know that we do discuss it and review it pretty regularly. And then as for the implementation of culturally competent, strength-based behavior modification as alternatives to incarceration, that's included in that paragraph. I mean, incarceration, of course, and Kimberly will tell you, it is ultimately a judicial decision. You know, I mean, we do have the ability to make some recommendations, but ours are only recommendations to the bench. The bench is the ultimate determiner of incarceration or not. So I don't necessarily know how that is implemented per se. And then on the, you know, the strength-based approach and positive attitude, I think that goes along with the training, of course, that, you know, we have and do. So I don't think that that's something that's not happening or not that we have an objection to, that we will continue to focus, you know, on some training and things of that nature. And then when we get to that, number 2, when it talks about juveniles, even though it doesn't necessarily, you know, talk about the county attorney's office, all juvenile matters start in the county attorney's office. So only when they are charged as a youth offender do they bump up to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. So when it talks about engaging in the community with practitioners and identify neighborhoods that are associated with large portion of juvenile crime, a lot of that is police direct, you know, driven, you know, when they determine, I mean, that affects a lot of where they put their substations, you know, where they put their community resources in. I mean, when they put like PAL, you know, police activity leagues, all of those things are all associated with those juvenile areas that have a high density for juvenile crime. So I think that's a whole lot of more. And then our CDW's office, which is our court designated workers office, which is where all juvenile intake starts at. And that's an AOC office, and that comes down from Frankfurt, and they're run based on through the AOC, you know, directives and things of that nature, not the county attorney's office. And then to go back to number 4, when you talked about those culturally competent strength-based programs, I would like it noted that the county attorney's office already and continues to participate in what we call community court, like drug court, veterans court, truancy court for our juveniles. I mean, we all have been supportive of those types of courts, and we all have a prosecutor that's assigned to those courts and works in those courts. And so we are working on those strength-based culturally type of things to try to, you know, do things. So, I mean, not that I'm saying we have an objection, but it's not noted that it's what we're doing. And being able to do other things, as Kim said, is budgetary. I mean, we've got to be able to have the money to do what, you know, some of the things are requested to do.
Now, my question is what is currently being done, is it helping the disparities when it comes to sentencing and incarceration of Black and African-American men and young men of color?
Before we get into that kind of substantive discussion, Mr. Dunn, do you have a proposal and some kind of proof or some kind of program that you would point to that does show some success?
There was a program in the court system, I do believe in the juvenile court system, YAP, that did have strength-based training that did have success.
And we do utilize YAP. YAP is not utilized.
We
Utilized
still
at
do
the
YAP.
Yeah, it's utilized at the CDW level. It's utilized in the juvenile court system, and they won't do status offenders. I've tried to get them to take my truancy and my runaways, but they won't necessarily. And those are their grant programs. I mean, but if there's a program out there, we beg for it to come and become part. You know, we're looking for programs to help.
Okay,
So if
let
that
me ask
program
you a
is-
question. Mr. Dunn, are you familiar with the regulations of YAP and what it will and will not permit?
I have paperwork on the regulations of it. I mean, it would take me to, you know, pull those papers out and start reading them off. But, you know, I do have their files and their paperwork with the regulations on it.
Okay,
But
well,
as a model, if it works for the youth or juveniles, it seems as though it might work for alternatives to incarcerating adults also.
well, let me make this proposal. Mr. Dunn, if you have something specific and some information or link to articles or programs, if you will share that with the prosecutors, and if you want to recommend those, then you can talk with them away from this meeting, because we're, you know, we're not going to get down into deep substantive discussion on those, but I would like for you to share facts with them, and also with Councilmember Masadi on what you suggested the mayor might do, more specific information. I have—
Yes, all my information with my fact finding is in my review document. So if there's any facts that need to be reviewed, there's all the factual information that anybody would need to see what my recommendations are talking about, because all my recommendations that I've submitted are based on the facts that I've researched that are listed under the documents reviewed, which were by attorneys and judges, prosecuting attorneys and judges. So if anyone needs any fact-based information, that's where it is, which is of course why I thought we were supposed to be reviewing documents in the first place, was to
Okay,
present
now
facts.
what we're looking at now is a summary. And so you're saying all your facts are in the underlying recommendation that's in our shared folder?
Oh yes, these aren't just recommendations that I just decided I wanted to come up with and just created by being ignorant. These are recommendations that were set forth by other prosecutors and judges. And I'm not just trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying to be a vessel to try to get this information out to the prosecutors in Lexington.
Okay, well,
So,
I would
yeah,
ask the prosecutors if you would look at the underlying recommendation. And Ms. Baird, you said you've been talking with Mr. Dunn separately, and Ms. Minifield, if you'll do the same thing and take a look at what he's doing and more specific. Okay.
Judge Kaufman, just real swiftly on this, am I hearing both the county attorneys and the Commonwealth attorneys express that for us to track demographics, and I'm thinking ongoing, let me know, Mr. Dunn, your recommendations for ongoing tracking of that. It's going to take additional budget dollars.
Now, they're talking about more advanced programs. And what I understood was that there are 3 areas we definitely want the prosecutor's offices to do from our previous conversations, that we want them to do training, that we want demographic statistics every way they can get it. And I specifically asked John Hain when he was here, can you give us those demographics, or can you keep those statistics? And he said yes. So it sounds as though that can be done. And then, you know, the other thing is staff, making the staff representative of the extent to which African Americans are represented in this population. I understood those were 3 areas we wanted to be included in this recommendation as to the prosecutors.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify for the demographics component specifically, do we have capacity in our current staffing structure to keep demographic information on those that we're serving in those
We
offices?
do not. And we have a different budget source. Well, some of it is a different budget source. So we're both in some aspects under Unified Prosecutorial Systems. The county has different funding sources that we do not. So I don't know. And so ours is a technology thing because we have a particular program that houses all of our information. So that was what Ms. Redcorn, we didn't have the ability to just print, you know, reports or whatever with respect to demographics. That's just not what our, as it stands now, our technology wasn't. But she was talking to our IT person to see if we had that ability. So that's where we left it. And if they don't have that ability, then they may require some sort of budgetary something in order to be able to track that.
Now, when you gave us statistics showing racial data, did you compile that by hand or did you get that from the AOC?
We did that by hand.
That's
so
what
we have, right. So that's why it took a while because we had to do that by hand. Yeah. So, and we only kept that because we have a chart with respect to homicides and a chart on per trial diversion and a chart on on deferred, I think. So we were able to literally go name, pull up the case, and then get those demographics.
So to do that, if we wanted you to keep that, we would have to recommend that you seek a budgetary enhancement to do so.
From somewhere, yes, it would, yeah, because it would require either a change in our technology or a staff person who's responsible for doing that, because the volume of hours, it's not feasible to do that by hand.
See, and that was one of the first questions that I was shut down by earlier today that you said you wanted me to send an email on. Was about, do I send that to the mayor's office or should I send it to the prosecutor's office?
Well, you sent that at 1:30, Mr. Dunn, or so, and I was sending out a summary for today's meeting, and it was just a little late for me to incorporate anything new at that point. And so when you say shut you down, I didn't mean to shut you down. I just said we'll have to address that after the meeting because it was too much detail to go into. You've seen all these recommendations. Too much detail to go into at that point for a brand new recommendation or even a consolidation that required just new elements.
Yes, ma'am, I agree, but we're having that conversation. So should it be sent to the mayor's office to see if she can fund it? And would Ms. Beard be open to having the mayor's office fund a research program to look into their office since they don't have the ability to fund it?
I think we're back
Brandon,
to,
can we suggest that there, but Brandon, would it satisfy that if we have a recommendation that we are keeping ongoing data and follow and monitoring the trends of the diversions post pretrial? And so we're suggesting that happen standardly. Would that satisfy what you're talking about?
Well, I'll send it to you, because I'm looking at my recommendations that I sent. Then I have a copy of, I guess, consolidated recommendations that don't look like mine. So I'm looking at two different ones that I submitted, then the ones that, well, I guess was consolidated. So, I mean, I'm looking at two different recommendations from the justice, from one I created and then one that somebody else, I guess, consolidated. So I don't actually know exactly who consolidated, how it was consolidated, but
I tell you what,
I will send my
I got that from Judge
with
Isaac.
specifics.
I got that from Judge Isaac after I asked you and her to try to consolidate your recommendations. So I think we better try to discuss that after the meeting.
Can I?
That'll work. And I just wanted to be sure what was, because I just try to send you one with exactly what you're asking to be specific. I understand that you didn't have time to look at the specifics that I sent, but sometimes when you say you need more specific information, I'm telling you a specific, it's kind of offensive. So, but I totally understand. After the meeting, I'll resend it to you, and I appreciate what you and Judge Isaacs has created. But for the discussion and the sake of moving forward, I understand where we're going. So, I mean, that is totally fine with me.
Okay, well, certainly, I'm certain that Judge Isaac consolidating these didn't mean to offend you, and I don't mean to offend you.
No, that wasn't offensive that she consolidated, because she did a good job. I just wanted to make sure that everything and all my recommendations were going to be in there, especially the new one that I wanted to consolidate to give more information.
Okay.
Can I just say
that's
something
fine.
quickly?
Yes, please do.
Mine, the number one under the recommendations for the prosecutors is that they look into a program which publishes a guide to aid prosecutors seeking to conduct research and to correct any disparity. So there are active programs out there that will help you. Either they'll suggest grants, they would suggest how you do this in the most monetarily efficient way. That program is seems to be a very good program, and so that is in there for them to try to implement it by going to these different programs that could assist them on the budgetary side.
Judge Isaac, does that encompass what Mr. Dunn's talking about, or do you know?
I think so. It's to conduct research into the office's work contributing to racial disparity, and then to correct and address the problems that research uncovers. I'm just talking, that's just the research issue.
Right.
That you all were talking about. So it needs a comprehensive, I mean, they can't just invent this, and people have been doing this for some years, and there's help out there, and there may be grants out there. So we're just asking them to look into these things. Because
Ms. Redcorn was aware of this when she talked to me about it. She had called and looked into it and was aware of a couple of things. So, so she knew about what that was, which is why she said she didn't have a problem with looking into that and partner or whatever. I think they are a little different than us. But
Judge Isaac and Mr. Dunn, can you go back to the drawing board kind of on your recommendations for the prosecutors and make sure that everything you both think should be in there is in there, and make sure that, and look at Mr. Dunn did say something about 130, 115. And I think he sent it to you, Judge Isaac.
Yes, I got it. It combined 1 and 2.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And well, there's a 1 and 2 under his additional recommendation, and a 1 and 2 under yours.
And 1 and 2 under his, he combined it into one paragraph.
If you two will just make sure everything you want is included in there, and that means both of you. And I would also ask that you include a recommendation, just as Judge Scorsone said about the courts, that you include a recommendation that the prosecutor's offices, staffs should reflect the community which they serve racially. And that includes the staff members, the prosecutors, and so forth. I think that's important. And also the mandatory training that Judge Scorsone was talking about. I think that's very important. And then also the statistics. I know there are problems in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, but Mr. Haynes said they could do that in the County Attorney's Office. And I think it's very important for them to keep those statistics so that they can see if there are any racial disparities. So I think you all need a little more work on yours, and I think you need to go on the prosecutor side, not the court side. And if you'll go back to the drawing board on that, and the two of you work together and give us something, sometime tomorrow, if you could.
Ought to be tonight.
Oh, I thought we were finishing today. That's
well,
yeah, we
I
finished
so
today.
But wait just a minute.
Finished.
We have the citizens who can still email us to racialjustice@lexingtonky.gov. Still have through today to make email comments. So we just need to make sure we get those emails. We probably won't get them from Laura until tomorrow. So it'll be tomorrow whenever you finish it up, I would say. Okay, let's move on to.
So we're not going to have a vote on the recommendations.
I asked, does anybody have any objection to the courts moving forward? And I'll ask, does anybody have, other than what's already voiced today, does anybody have any objection to the prosecutor recommendations moving forward? Ms. Bayer?
And I ask the retooling that Judge Isaac and Brandon are going to do, are you all going to send that to the prosecutors for us to give any input before that's sent out, since we're not voting anymore?
Yeah,
it's going to be simple. I was just going to make it more specific. So it's not really that much of a change. Just instead of saying look into and investigate, there's going to be actual things that I feel like should be looked into. So, I mean, that's all that I was going to clear up.
Well, I would like for you all to send it to the prosecutors, to Ms. Minifield and Ms. Bayard. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
That's no problem.
Okay, and I'm not hearing any real objection, Ms. Bayard, about these going forward. I am hearing a need for more specificity and a budgetary issue, right?
Correct.
Okay, Ms. Minifield, I'm not hearing from you any real objection. Is that correct?
That is correct. No real objection.
Okay, anybody else? Do you have any objection to the prosecutor recommendations subject to specificity being added going forward? Okay, let's move over into the law enforcement recommendations if we can. There are a few things in there today that you haven't really seen before. I'm going to sort of start at the end. These are divided into 4 subcategories. And the last one is section 4, structure and staffing. And if you would take a look at that, please. We have one recommendation there that, well, actually there are 2 combined. Judge Corsoni made one, I made the other, we combined them. That says have non-law enforcement personnel respond to appropriate 911 calls and reallocate financial resources from the Lexington Police Department to other agencies accordingly. Up on the screen now, the program referenced is the one called Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon. And then there would be reports and analyses, 911 monthly reports to show the types of calls and to show how police spend their time in certain areas, mental health, homelessness, etc. And then make the 911 call show robust statistics such as the above divisions of statistics. Is there anybody who's objecting to that program? They were there, but just in 2 separate recommendations last time.
Can I ask a clarification, Judge?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm reading that, and most of it is talking about analyzing and doing reports and things like that. And then it looks like that there's a line, and then report your findings. But then there's a line in there about using a team of paramedics and social workers, which is not, I guess, currently the situation. So is the thought that there will be a paramedic and social worker hired or identified as something that's going to happen while this analysis is happening? Like, is that happening at the same time, or is it let's analyze and then we use a team?
You know, I would say I would leave that to the council. We gave them a pilot project that's pretty well set out. And I think in the actual recommendation that Judge Corsoni made, there's even a link to it. Judge Corsoni, is there anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, Eugene, Oregon is just one of many communities that have adopted this. And yes, the answer is you're going to have to hire a team of folks. And what they've used is a combination of 2 people, a paramedic and a social worker. So from the get-go, from the 911 call, if you train your 911 callers as to which calls are susceptible to being handled by this team, they just send the team out to do it rather than sending a policeman or a firefighter.
And I asked Councilmember Masadi about this, and one of her comments was that she liked it. You can speak for yourself, Councilmember Masadi, but that she saw some training issues. So I think there'd be a lag in setting it up.
That was my question. If there was training for analysis first and then do that, as opposed to it kind of looked like it was concurrent. That was my question.
It looks like there would be training first. Ms. Pursley?
I think it's a good idea, but I do think about Lieutenant Brenda Cowan and the situation that occurred when paramedics arrived on the scene first, and they were fired upon, and then they created where the police need to respond to the scene first to make sure it's all safe, and then paramedics move in. So I think the same concept should apply here, just to make sure that no one's in harm's way prior to, just making sure that the call that they're receiving is reflective of the actual situation.
Yeah, I had the same thought, but I have to believe if they've done these programs, they have some of those things thought through and programmed in.
They develop pretty good protocols, and I think we've used that statistics before. In Eugene, out of 2,400 calls, they sent these teams out, and only in 150 of the 2,400 did they have to call for backup police. So it's a matter of training, absolutely, and protocols. Yeah.
Councilmember Asadi, is this specific enough for your use?
Yes, it is. I'm just going to tell you realistically, this is one of the hardest jobs to fill. Not only is because of the training, but the training is, most of the trainings are required to be trained off-site, and they have to go and spend 6 weeks at Eastern. So that cuts your pool of resources in half already. And we've had this discussion with Commander Stack over and over. It's a tough enough job as it is. And if you have to take people away where they have to live on a campus situation and can't go back and forth daily, it makes the pool of applicants even smaller. Yeah. So this is one of our hardest that we have to fill and keep people in that position.
And
I think it's a great
program. True with all 911 workers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it is.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
No. I'm finished. I'm just saying it's probably one of our hardest jobs that we have to fill as far as our personnel.
I agree, and with social workers, probably one of the most lower paying jobs.
Yes.
For the work that they have to do. But right now, we have social workers that respond on scene a lot of times when children are involved already. They respond to the hospital, they respond to the scene. So we already have a little bit of training, and I don't know if you know that the police have social workers on scene when there are children involved.
I did not know that, and I think that's great, and I would love to expand this program. My observation was this is just a tough job to fill.
Yeah. Sure. Well, you got to pay them
a
living wage. That's the first thing.
Amen. I mean, you know my feeling about that.
Yes.
So I'm just being realistic and just saying if we don't have the correct training and if we don't pay them, it's a difficult find.
Yeah. Okay. With regard to this recommendation, is there any object? Oh, and I should say about 911, Mr. Stack, who's the head of the 911, and Dr. Potter and I are doing three-way emails about these reports and about what the reports could show even now. But I will tell you that the pilot project in paragraph 1 that will have a budgetary impact. We just don't know what it would be. Okay, is there any opposition to this recommendation going forward? Speak up. Nobody. Okay, the next one is very short. I just got it from Dr. Price, and it's about a sobering center. If you remember, we talked at one point about whether some assessment could be doing. Oh, I see there is opposition, but they didn't speak up. Oh, that's from Sheriff Witt. Sheriff Witt, could you speak up there about your opposition to the
yes, ma'am. I was just waiting to be called upon. I raised my hand, but that's okay.
I can't hear you. I mean, I can't see everybody because of the shared screen.
Okay.
That's why I said speak up.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can. I hope everybody can.
So thank you. I oppose any reallocation of funds already approved in the budget process for this fiscal year, moving from the Lexington Police Department to other partner agencies. I also don't think that we were able, because of our time constraints, to spend enough time really educating this entire body. Some of us have a really good understanding of the paramedicine program, and to those who join us on YouTube. Our paramedicine program is outstanding. It's becoming a national model. And maybe if we want to consider expanding it to always include a social worker, that might feel what this recommendation is trying to accomplish. I know I come from, so don't misunderstand me, I come from a family of social workers. I love social workers, but what we see in our community, and especially what I see with our juveniles, is that oftentimes our cabinet workers bring us the transport orders because they say they are too afraid to make those transports. In my entire time as sheriff, I have only had one social worker agree to go with us to transport a child. And so I see a lot of issues that we really haven't discussed about this.
Okay. And so what I hear you saying is that alternatively, we should consider expanding the paramedicine program, or and we've talked a little bit about that, but not very much. And I know there is a very good paramedicine program, and some citizens have written us emails about that, and we talked about it on the town hall to some degree. Are you suggesting that we put in here as an alternative to expand the paramedicine program?
Yes, I would make that suggestion. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Judge Scorsoni, would you accept that?
You're muted, brother.
You're muted, Judge.
The whole point of what these cities have done is to try to keep from getting the police department involved, to keep law enforcement from handling these issues from the get-go. So I think it's significant that we have non-law enforcement people respond to certain cases, not all cases, but certain cases. Otherwise, we defeat the purpose. The purpose is try to handle community problems without sending folks to jail or sending them to the hospital. And that's the beauty of this program, is you're diverting people out of the criminal justice system. Because I thought that was the purpose. If we build it into already the law enforcement model, then it's not what we're trying to do.
And the paramedicine program does not send people to jail at all. And they oftentimes do not have to take people to the hospital. They're able to reduce those calls, in which others, because they felt they had no other alternative but to dial 911 because they had fallen and couldn't get up. The paramedicine program has hundreds of clients growing every day that they work with in order to not send people to jail and not to the hospital.
Councilmember Masai, I guess it's fair to say, isn't it, that that this pilot, until this pilot project would be developed, that the paramedicine program would continue to exist, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Chief Mayor,
can I interject something as far as
I don't see who. Oh yes, Ms. Vogel.
There is a peer support program, and those folks usually stem from drug court, Hope Center, Chrysalis House. There is a peer support program here in Kentucky, and those folks are paid by Medicaid, and they make a nice amount of money. And they could be a part of this expansion of people who would be on call for people who are suffering from drug abuse or substance abuse or whatever. But I would like for folks to consider that, the peer support program.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna make a note here that I guess the peer support program and the paramedicine program would continue here. And Chief Maynard, I know you believe strongly in the paramedicine program. Are you familiar with the peer support program?
I apologize. My connection, hopefully you can hear me. My connection, I got lost about the time the Sheriff started talking about the paramedicine program. So I do support the paramedicine program. I think it covers a lot of what this aspect is, and the goal is not to take them to jail. I am not familiar with peer support, and I caught the tail end of Tanya when I came back there.
Well, Ms. Vogel, would you mind making sure that Chief Maynard is aware of the peer support program separately by email? Because until and unless this pilot project would be adopted, we have to use what we already have, and that is the peer support program and the pilot project. Is there anybody else who has an objection to this recommendation going forward? Please speak up, because I can't see everyone. Okay, one objection to it going forward. So I would say, if there are no other objections, that this is a recommendation we'll send forward, but the other programs will continue as they already exist. The one just after that is this sobering center, if you remember, and I may have my facts wrong, and I want you to correct me if I do. As I recall, people were asking about an assessment for people who were brought in intoxicated. And there was an indication that no assessment was made until an arrest was made. And Dr. Price suggested this as a sobering center, which is short-term, 4 to 12-hour recovery, where it would be a fully staffed facility, an alternative to jail or emergency room, and would be used as a component of the non-law enforcement response above. And I guess that couldn't really be done until and unless you did some sort of diversion of the 911 program. Any thoughts on that, or any objection, I should say, to such a center?
Who would man that? Would it have to be? It would obviously need to be medical personnel, and so what would be the cost of that? I mean, would we?
Do you know anything about that, Dr. Price?
I made this recommendation, and I think the language that I originally used, that the LFCUG should begin evaluating the costs associated with developing such a program in our city. So I recognize that we are under budgetary constraints, and many of the things that we have put forward require money. But I think if we can find, you know, we're in a moment where people are having a more compassionate conversation about drug users and drug addiction. And if we can find a way to defer these people away from the only sort of option being to go into jail or into an emergency room, that in many cities they have found that it particularly works with people who have who are repeat players in the system, and where you may not be able to find an immediate change in behavior, but it allows you to stop the interactions with the criminal justice system. But it's a long-term plan. I think the city should think about as we think through the offerings we have for people with substance abuse.
So long-term plan, and you want it to say begin the process of evaluating the cost of developing it. So it's a longer-term plan. Okay.
And as we continue to work through, the recommendations, I would remind us of our intent. And I'm not certain that we will be realistic, and we will recognize short, intermediate, and long-term plans, but it's not incumbent upon us to figure out how much it costs right now. These are recommendations that will address systemic racism, and we're going to set them forward. Understanding that folks we're going to have to reprioritize and reform and other things, but I just want to remind us of that.
Judge? I was really getting discouraged. I keep hearing about the budget, money, and I know that the Healing Place in Louisville has an excellent program. We used to have it. It was called Safe Off the Street. That would give a person enough time to sober up.
Excuse me, Ms. Vogel. I'm sorry. We're not going to be able to talk about every single alternative, but I would like to hear what Councilmember Masadi was going to say about the budgetary impact of this or whatever.
Well, it was more of an observation. We have a resource on this committee. We have Laura Hatfield, who deals with this every day, and she is out of the mayor's office. So I think she can give us any kind of information as far as some of the programs that are already in place, what's working and maybe what's not working. I've not heard much from Laura, and I understand her position here, but she's the point person in the mayor's office for this. So,
you know, she just told me yesterday that they are facilitators to this process and that she is not supposed to be adding anything. So that's why you're not hearing from her, I would say.
This is what she does. This is what we hired her for. So,
so we know those exist. So we're either going to push through these, or yeah.
Okay. All right. So is there any objection to beginning the process of evaluating a long-term study, evaluating the cost of developing a sobering center? Any objection? Please speak up. Okay, that recommendation will go forward. And then the only other thing under this section on structure and staffing is an equity officer. That's Mr. Cozart's recommendation. You see it written there. First of all, let me just take your temperature. Is there any objection to developing such a position? You need to speak up. Can I ask, David, are you going to
get the data from all of these statistics, going to get the statistics from all of the data that we're going to start, that we're asking to be captured from stops and so forth. And then you would be able to ascertain what's going on or in trends from that data.
Absolutely. That's the sentiment of this agent. I would not do it, and we will not always be in place to do it. There should be an ongoing agent or component within the systems or contiguous to the systems that's monitoring trends and inordinate activity and inequities. And so it's one of those stay ready, you don't have to get ready. We're monitoring this ongoing for racial inequity. And that's why I was asking if that might be part of the satisfaction to Mr. Dunn's recommendation, that agent be there and that research be done. We shouldn't have to do a special research project. We shouldn't have to start doing demographics. We should do it standardly. That's continuous quality improvement. That's relentless quality control. And we need to do that in reference to racial equity. This position would do that.
You know, as we talked about this, Ms. Gunther, Mr. Cozart realized, hey, we need somebody who can look at all these reviews and recognize racial disparities right there. And so you hit it right on the head. Yeah. And
report it publicly, help Chief Maynard be able to identify any inordinate policing in a certain geography, even could roll over into the justice system, looking at some of those other points of discretion where inequity is continuing, in this case, quite frankly, but be able to identify them, daylight them, and unearth them and address them.
Yeah, okay. Councilmember Masadi.
Just curious, what office does this come out of? Is this going to be out of the mayor's office? Is going to be at, kind of get some more specifics on where is this coming from?
Well, I think it could be in several places. What we know it needs to have is some autonomy and liberty, and not have to suffer the trepidation of being oppressed by being in the office that it's auditing. And so we know that there's a current office, and again, I don't think we want to get in the weeds, but there is a current Office of Equity, and Mr. Lucas, who staffs one of these, is part of that. There's possibility of reassigning some things and adjusting some potential current description. There's an economic equity agent within government. So there's an opportunity to do this.
I'm just curious where this is going to fall, because I
can tell you that's a question. Office.
I'm sorry?
Could be. It could be in the mayor's cabinet. It could be in the CAO's office.
Okay. Just curious. Thank you.
I think we would give the council some latitude on that, but there are some certain, I mean, the council, you would obviously have some latitude, but there's some certain qualities that need to exist and needs to have the ability to do this auditing sort of work.
Sure, and I'm sure objectivity is the biggest issue, and I agree with you. I'm just was curious, where are you thinking this was going to fall in the government? That's all.
So before you all answer that question, and before I sign off as a citizen, I'd like to express this. I don't know the difference between, I don't know your language, and I don't know the difference between you all asking for clarification and being allowed to explain something versus what I was just doing when I got cut off. Surely to God, I don't want to be on any judges or prosecutors' bedside. But if you all ask Brandon and I to join these conversations, but then you pass right over us because you don't want to get into the weeds, then why are we here? I take offense to being shut down when I just sat here and listened to explanations being given just now and on this call. And so that has hurt my feelings. I am a professional, even though I'm emotional right now. Good luck with this subcommittee. If it was something just to appear for people to meet every week to try to get something done, then okay, so be it. But right now, I have taken offense to what just happened to me versus what
I want to apologize to you if I offended.
I understand, but I'm going to sign off right now, Judge Kaufman. I don't want to be on anybody's bedside, but y'all don't live down here in the hood. Y'all don't get stopped. Y'all don't experience the stuff that we experience, and we bring a different level. Okay, I'm not gonna get off on that because we have a time constraint. I understand that. I barely speak up at all because I'm trying to learn, but I'm done. So thank you.
Tana, you can't be done. You can't be done, Tana. Come on now.
Well, I hope you will stay on there. If I offended you, I am sorry. You were talking about the healing place in Louisville. I heard what you were talking about, but I wanted to be sure we stuck to the recommendations we have and talked about them. Is there any objection to this equity officer recommendation going forward? Speak up, please, because again, I can't see all of you.
I guess I would have to say that as a person who's lived under the authority of equity officers in universities for a very long time, I'm very skeptical of these positions and what they actually do. Often they're not hired. The people who are hired to do them don't have any sophistication with the kind of data analysis that you want them to do. And what they end up being is just more of a kind of public relations for institutions to gloss over sort of any kind of real change. And I think what might be more helpful is someone to coordinate the way in which all of this data is collected. I'm okay with having a person who does that based at the city, who helps to bring together all of the data we have to look at regularly. But I don't know if I would call them an equity officer. It's just a basic data analyst. The equity comes from the people who are in the system already, because this person has no real power to impact any kind of policy change within the offices. And it might be good to have them sending up red flags, but essentially what this person is doing is not equity. They're just providing information to people who would be in charge of making more equitable decisions. Right.
You know, I think that's a really good point. Do you have and but you're not just quibbling with the title. You want to make sure that they're actually monitoring and analyzing data, right?
Let me work with duly noted and agreed, and don't want it to be a perfunctory spot that we see so often. That equity officer is more of a sentiment than an actual name. So if you would help me with that language, we could modify that, and you'll see that, and it may be an office, not just an officer. And I believe we're going to see the similar sentiment rising up out of other committees.
Right.
I mean,
one
of the things that I think it became really obvious really quickly when we moved to the justice system are the multitude of ways that people are and are not keeping information. It's actually stunning in comparison to the kind of information that we receive from the police department relatively quickly. And I think it's easy, there's a kind of off balance in the ways in which we're looking at this if we think that they're the only people who should be required to so consistently track what they're doing. And we're just making recommendations of what might be possible on the other side.
Thank you so much.
And the original has them trying to monitor that continuum as well, Dr. Price. So I'm gonna hit you up and get you to help me with the language and that to make it more robust.
Right. Is there any objection to that recommendation going forward? Okay, good. That is structure and staffing. Now, I'd like to go to a few. Somebody might want to mute their mic. I'd like to go to
Melissa, mute.
About.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'd like to go to a couple of things about which I don't think there'll be too many objections, and that is the section 3 on training, recruitment, and hiring. First, we have a set of recommendations on hiring and recruiting. Then we have a set of recommendations on training. Are there any objections to any of those, really? Let's start with hiring and recruitment. Any objections to those?
It's not an objection, Judge. But I like that in the training proposal, it talks about active officers emphasizing de-escalation of violence in continuing education, basically. I would like to see if we could do it also in terms of the initial training. That would just be like if you could on paragraph number 2, under hiring and recruitment proposals, where we talk about enhancing our, hiring a consultant to enhance our current hiring and training of officers. If we could add and to emphasize de-escalation of violence, so that basically the goal is there from the very beginning as we train officers, de-escalation of violence, not just kind of a continuing education.
Yeah, those are Ms. Queen's recommendations. Ms. Queen, do you accept that?
I do, yes, ma'am, that's fine.
Right. Any other objection or suggestion for change to any of the hiring and recruitment proposals? Anybody? All right, what about the training proposals? Any objections? Are there any objections for all of these, to all of these hiring and recruitment and training proposals going forward? Okay, that's good, and that is section 3. In section, yes, I am going backward, and I know that, but okay, in section 2, monitoring and accountability, I want to ask you about the 3rd recommendation, which is reviews of de-escalation and use of force. That is Brian Baynard's recommendation for the police department, and that's already in process, to tell you the truth. He has explained it to me a little bit more even today, and I tried to write it out so that even I could understand it, and I thought it would make it clear. And basically, they review these incidents, and he thinks that the review should be separated. Any objection to that, so that both use of force and de-escalation would be reviewed in the incident by the incident review committee? No, any objection to that going forward?
Judge, will you repeat what you just said?
The reviews of de-escalation and use of force would be separated in the formal review of all critical incidents by the critical incident review committee.
Gotcha. Okay. Because right now they're together. Is that what you said?
I think that's right. And they're looking at it right now, and he's made this recommendation. So I'd say it's going to happen. Okay. Any objection to that? Okay, the one just below that is also, I think, non-controversial, anti-retaliation policy against complainants. I think Dr. Price recommended this, and Mr. Maynard did look, Chief Maynard did look at their policies, and it's not in there. And he thinks that's reasonable too. And so this would be an anti-retaliation policy against a complainant. There is something in the general orders against contact with a complainant, but not retaliation. So any objection to that policy going forward, that recommendation going forward? I want to skip the next one and look at the recommendation on the next page, recommendation on enhancing information in police reports and reviewing them for racial bias. Ms. Gunther and Chief Maynard made various recommendations. We've been emailing back and forth, and I actually asked him if it would be okay to combine all of this into this recommendation, that we ask the police to enhance the information in police reports and review them for racial bias. And so right now, there are reports, there are general orders about the contents of those reports, but it does not include this information, whether a search was conducted and whether handcuffs were utilized, regardless of whether a detention occurred. This includes document searches, whether they do or do not result in the recovery of evidence, and then to document and capture all data, analyze it for revealing racial disparities. Any objection to that recommendation going forward?
Judge, not an objection, but a clarification on the first number one as to each encounter, that we would specifically address the handcuffing and the searching and not necessarily every single encounter.
When you say, and you don't like that word, and I should have said that, we need to change that word, don't we?
Correct. Just to expand on what specifically we are asking for, because we have all kinds of encounters. So it's just specifically for the handcuffing and the searching.
Will you and Dr. Gunther work with me on how to describe that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Gunther, you'll work with us on that.
Yeah, because I mean, my thing is not the benign things, but the majority of the times that police stop, it doesn't result in an arrest or anything. So
Right.
I'm talking about when it's law enforcement, it's not them. I'll talk to you, Brian.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay. Any objection to that recommendation going forward? Thank you. It goes. The very last one in that section, this is, I think, from Sheriff Witt. The recommendation is submit national use of force data, and it would require all law enforcement agencies in Lexington, Fayette County to submit their data to the national use of force data collection. And then it said the commission may also want to consider asking our Fayette County legislators if that might be appropriate statewide, and I would leave it to the commission to do that. Is there any objection to that recommendation going forward? Anybody? Okay, and then the one right before that is reports and analyses, and this is sort of a catch-all on analysis of reports. The first Citizens Crime and Law Enforcement Survey can be done locally, and according to Commissioner of Social Services Chris Ford, it could be done out of Laura Hatfield's office, but there are other places too. That's a local effort, would not require any additional staff. The second is a victimization survey that would require a grant, and in my in Dr. Potter's full documents, he gave us some links on that. The third is a report of progress on reforms undertaken in LPD policies and practices. And that is key to what's going on. What about chokeholds? What about strangleholds? What about everything? Just for the police chief to come and report on this. Probably, I believe it says to the Planning Public Safety Committee. And the next one is analysis and report on NIBRIS data furnished to the FBI. According to Chief Maynard, that's a big deal. We don't have the software to do it. There are grants available, and that would be a longer term issue. And then the fifth one is Lexington Police Department to report to the public on historical data and patterns of bias. This is Dr. Price's recommendation. LPD would work with local historians to undergo a review of their archives, uncover past patterns of bias, and you see what it is. And I assume, Dr. Price, that would be in conjunction with perhaps somebody at the university. Is that right?
It also, I think it goes part and parcel with the recommendation by David Cozart around as part of cultural competency. I think that often, particularly we're talking about new police recruits who are younger people who may have only known the police department, so I think I'm teaching students now who were born in 1999. So they may not be aware why some older people older than them may have the similar attitudes about policing. So I think it goes hand in hand, and also as a part of the early documents we received on 21st century policing, which actually I think calls for a more robust analysis of this historical data than that seemed to be in that report, but may have already been done.
And Dr. Price, is this the kind of thing that that might be a good project for someone in the history department to do at UK?
You ask an academic basically the easiest question on earth. Yes, this would be a great project.
And so we're not really talking about budgetary impact there, are we?
Potentially, no. You would just need to go through the necessary requirements to gain access to police data and police archives. So,
okay, and if this got in the recommendations, how would the commission connect with the right person to do it?
if you connect with me, I'll get you to the right people to do it.
Okay, okay. All right, so you see that as a group, reports and analyses. Is there any objection to all or any of that recommendation? Okay, it'll go forward. Now, I want to circle back to one thing that I had a note here to do and I forgot to do it. Mr. Dunn, Dr. Price or Mr. Cozart, one, suggested that that position recommended and called an equity officer, but maybe called a data analyst, might address some of the concerns you raised a while ago. Does it?
Is that a direct question to Brandon?
Yeah, Mr. Dunn. Mr. Dunn, this Mr. Cozart suggested that that position he recommended as equity officer, which Dr. Price said might better be called a data analyst, might address some of your concerns about analyzing patterns to unearth racial bias. Does that address some of your concerns?
It does.
Okay, good. Then, you know, that conversation that Dr. Price and Mr. Cozart are going to have about what to call the position, would you kind of join into that about what kind of data should be collected and see if it does address your concerns?
Ain't no problem.
Thank you very
Judge
much.
Kaufman, I also make this point because if, for instance, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is able to find some funding to set up a system similar to the one recommended by the Vera Institute, and the County Attorney's Office, and even if we have more data, if there isn't somebody who makes sure there's a way in which we could come together and again have a joined conversation, we could still be subject to the same critiques of the presentation by Damon Preston, where they say, well, your data is different than my data.
Right.
So it would be good to think about how we might create within our jurisdiction, some sort of agreements about how all this data is kept in order to make these kinds of systemic analyses.
Well, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
after today, we have no jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Okay, there is, let's see. There are some other recommendations that I want us to address. One is the recommendation to expand the look back for disciplinary purposes beyond 5 years. And Ms. Gunther and I have just today discussed this. And she came up with this, and we have worked on the language a little bit. This will require a revision of the collective bargaining agreement. So it is more a proposal that it be considered, right, Ms. Gunther?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Does anybody object to putting forward that recommendation that it be considered, that we consider expanding the look back period beyond 5 years?
Are we not being specific and saying 10 years, 20 years? I mean, are we just saying beyond 5 years? We talking 5.1?
What do you think, Ms. Gunther?
I believe that when Judge Kaufman and I talked about it, it would be for the same type of incident, for the same type of behavior. It's their career.
Okay.
You look back to
So career look back.
You're right.
a career look back for the same types of behavior, the same pattern of behavior.
Okay, yeah, it's in there. The look back shall be the entirety of his or her career, not just 5 years. Sorry. Okay, any objection to that going forward? Okay, it will go forward. Now, I want to circle back to body-worn cameras. And that is the first part of section 2. And that is Ms. Gunther's recommendation. We've talked about that a lot, and she also went back to Chief Maynard and they talked about things, and I think on some areas, maybe not very many, agreed to disagree. But I want to ask, as it's written now, is there any objection to part or all of this recommendation? Speak up so we can all hear you.
Yes, ma'am. I have objections. It's the same ones that I presented, and Notre have discussed this, and I understand why it's there. But 3, 5, and number 10 are my objections. Number 9, for clarification, the first part says increase civilian complaint against officers from a period of 30 days. We don't have a requirement for it to be within 30 days. So I don't know if that's part of the 30-day body worn camera where we keep the non-evidentiary. So that's what that is. Not the complaint itself can only be filed in 30 days, but it's the body worn camera. Is that what you're talking about, Denotra?
Yes, well, we want to make sure that the body worn camera footage is maintained for as long as the period of time that someone has to file a complaint. And I believe that there was a 30-day, some type of window when informal complaint can be made. And we want to make sure we expand that because lay people don't know that. And then when they find it out, it's the day before the deadline.
So I'll keep mine at 3, 5, 9, and 10 are my objections.
Okay. Do you want to try to persuade anybody to your direction?
Sure. So number 3, on 25% of the officer's body worn camera on a monthly or bi-monthly cases with a coach, you would have approximately 1 coach per squad. So I would need 36 coaches administratively to focus on that with the officers. Plus you're also pulling an officer off the street 1 out of 4 days for them. So staffing and logistically, cost associated with that, to me, is an unrealistic approach.
And Brian, let me just interject there that was Judge Kaufman's recommendation as well. That was her recommendation that we've incorporated because for immediate feedback of behavior so that behavior can be immediately addressed and corrected.
Is there a compromise there? Is there a compromise on those? Well, why don't we just, after the meeting, I'll email with Ms. Gunther and I'll email separately with you, Chief Maynard, and see if we can come up with a compromise. Is that okay?
Absolutely. That works for me.
Okay.
Judge Corsoni?
I was just going to suggest, can we limit it to folks where there's been a complaint about, racial disparity or whatever? And that would narrow the universe dramatically.
I think I would be fine with that. What about you, Ms. Gunther?
Yes, but I mean, we wouldn't want that to be a step in the process of getting rid of someone who has been discriminating as a law enforcement officer. We don't want to give them yet another step to rehabilitation. We're not interested in rehabilitating a bad cop. But it could be a very benign thing, Chief, and yes, that would be helpful. But I don't think that it's overt, though. I believe it was to be able to understand that it's a very subtle thing. And I think you only can see that when you're reviewing a lot of the body worn camera footage. But I understand that it's a big ask and that it's time consuming, and surely we want you working as opposed to being in the office.
We have a written suggestion that it could be doing a probationary period. So let's you, Ms. Gunther, and Chief Maynard and I talked about that and try to compromise something there. What about number 5, Chief?
Number 5 is the officer safety issue that I brought up. I understand the decrease of wanting to have the officer do it, but there is an officer safety component that I cannot get around, that the officers have to have as an officer safety component of not getting on.
We talked about that last meeting, I think. What about 10? Is that we talk about that too?
It's the same thing. It's having the camera on the entire time. It's an employee satisfaction issue. It's also an issue of cost associated with storing that data. It's an issue with administrative folks having to go back and trying to identify what specific video out of that 10-hour of service goes with each case number. And I think it would be astronomical costs associated with that, plus the storage of the data itself.
Okay. Is there any other objection, aside from what Chief Maynard has said, to this recommendation going forward?
Judge Kaufman, at Sheriff Witt, I'm going to agree with Chief Maynard, and I also want to ask Chief Maynard about his feelings of item number 1, every sworn officer should be required. How does that affect your plainclothes, say, narcotics officers?
The plainclothes narcotics officers, when they are doing search warrants, they already have body worn cameras. If there are requirements or notifications are already in our body worn camera policy, if they are in the process of being undercover, then they cannot have a body worn camera on. That's pretty clear. But we do ask that if they're doing search warrants or doing any type of law enforcement action where it's not going to compromise their safety or security, that they already have body worn cameras.
Well, so what you're saying that there are some times that the plainclothes officers won't have the body worn camera on, correct?
That is correct.
And I agree with that. I just want to make sure this body understands that, but I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Well, Sheriff, I understand that it kind of defeats the purpose of being undercover if you've got all of the devices of I'm a cop. So no, I get that.
Yeah, but maybe it should be written in there, Ms. Gunford.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. All right, any other objection aside from Sheriff Witt and Chief Maynard? Okay, any more objection to that recommendation? Then it does go forward. Okay.
And I just want to put, just because I work with Brian and I understand what his concerns were, so from a Commonwealth perspective, I guess I'll kind of defer to him on those things because I can understand the issues because it'll at some point.
It's burdensome. I know that what I've recommended is burdensome and onerous. I get that. I do. I'm hoping that we can, our goal is to get 100% of camera footage and not have the discretion to turn it off, so we need to just try to find how we can get there.
Right. Right. And I get what you're saying. And then I get the flip side of trying to figure that out, because it could make it worse for defense attorneys trying to find a particular issue. So
absolutely.
We are almost finished, but we're going to just push forward even if we run just a little bit over. The very next recommendation below that. So that will go forward with those 3 objections for those sections, and there will be some written clarification in some of those. Recommendation below that, recommendation to review the structure of collective bargaining and fraternal order of police. You have that. That was written by Ms. Queen. Is there any objection to that? It's to a study to be done by a university or another consultant, and then to recommend that no agreements be made that would hinder or restrict or limit the implementation of disciplinary review boards. And in the actual recommendation, this is just a summary, but in the actual recommendation, Ms. Queen cited a Duke University study that pointed out obstructions to disciplinary reviews. And I got the impression from what she said that Lexington was actually used as an example, and some of the ways in which they were limited were recited. Okay.
There were 178 cities that were included in that. And the states like Kentucky were a part of that had law enforcement Bill of Rights states, where that's how that Dr. Russian had identified those, and Lexington being a part of that.
Okay. All right. Any objection to that recommendation going forward? Speak up. It will go forward.
Councilman Masadi, your hand was up. You have to unmute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just did. I'm sorry. I think in reviewing this is going to be a tall order. I really do. I mean, you're going to have a consultant, or you're going to have someone from the university conduct all these interviews and go to the FOP and say, this is how you should structure your bargaining. I understand what you're trying to achieve. I'm just thinking this is going to be very difficult to achieve. Just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. Does that mean you object to it?
If I'm in a union or a bargaining committee and I've got someone telling me how to bargain for me that's not representing me or doesn't understand it, yes. And yes, I'll just say
well,
yes.
What I see here is a local study that would include surveys and questionnaires and so forth for the purpose of examining potential modifications. And but it doesn't say where the report would be made, Ms. Queen.
Well, the report would be made, for the administration,
to the mayor's office or the council.
Yes. That's
Okay,
correct.
so the report will be to the mayor and the council.
That's correct.
I see. So you're not giving this to the FOP. You're giving this to another body to kind of as an objective analysis.
That is correct.
Okay, that was my misunderstanding. I thought you were going to hand this to the FOP and say, "This is, guys, this is what we want you to do."
No, this is for the mayor's office, the administration, for just a broader view and an analysis of a local fraternal order of police.
Okay, I withdraw my objection then. Thank you.
It will go forward then, hearing no other objection. And then we come back to number 1. That has all, and I ran this by Ms. Minifield, ran this by Ms. Pursley, and then I ran that by Council Member Masadi. She thinks it's better to put all this together to talk about that we recommend citizen participation, education, and assistance in police disciplinary process. And the first was obviously what we talked about our last meeting, the participation, expanding the disciplinary review board to 9 with 3 voting civilian members. The second is education, that is transparency in the disciplinary process, and the components are listed under that. And then the third, more education, and this is on complaints within the police department, making the folder, the brochure for guidance more transparent. And then the fourth component, assistance, and that is the citizens liaison outside the police department. And I see that there have been a flurry of emails about that today. And so let's talk about this one. Is there any objection to assuming Ms. Pursley gets, and we get this ironed out about where that citizens liaison could be, is there any objection to this recommendation going forward?
Well, I guess I got to talk a little bit about this expanding the DRB to 9. Right now it's at 7. And if we make 3 of those people citizens, then we've got 3 police officers, chief, assistant chiefs and so forth, as per the statute. And then one FOP member. So you got 3, 3, and 1. If you go to 9, you're gonna have 5 police administrative people, 3 citizens, and 1 FOP, which I think defeats the whole purpose of the citizens really having a voice. And so I know we went away with my citizens being, having some sort of citizen group that did some investigation and just decided to settle with the citizens being on this review board. But, and then if we take them up to 9, we're going to really take that citizens involvement down to almost nil. And so I think we really do a disservice to what the community has asked us for, is some citizens' true involvement. And I have gotten several phone calls from citizens regarding that once they get to this disciplinary review board, they've already gone through the investigation and they've gone through the chief, and now they've gotten to this level. What you have gotten is a watered down, or what they believe you've gotten is a desired resort investigation. And so that's what these people are getting. And they really don't believe that they're really getting what the citizens' viewpoint was. And that in most opportunities, when a citizen files a complaint, that they have, and this is from people who have filed complaints, their criticisms about the process is that it goes through that public integrity unit. They talk to the officer, they look at some video camera, at least that's what they say they look at, but then they come back and say, well, we didn't find any problems. And then the citizen is like, well, hey, you didn't talk to my neighbor, you didn't talk to my son who was in the house. There's so many things why they want us want involvement in the investigative stage, that they don't believe happened. But I'm not going to continue to harp on that involvement necessary because it's already been voted down. But I think that we water it down even more when we put this this review board down to 3 citizens and 5 officers. So if all we're going to do is water it all down, we pretty much wasted our time.
So we do need a pre-disciplinary component with citizen input. Pre-disciplinary is what you're stating, right?
No, I'm just stating that if we don't deal with it at the investigative stage, what you end up at the result is what you've got, a desired result investigation is what the citizens are saying.
So yeah, I'm in agreement with that. We need a pre-disciplinary recommendation with citizen input pre-disciplinary.
And I would only add that I believe, you know, I really wanted the kind of the Citizens Review Board, but the structure we couldn't agree upon. But I wanted to just say that, you know, if citizens are involved in investigation, the voluntary aspect of it, I think is challenging. I think I agree with Ms. Minifield. I think that more citizens should be on it. But I know that, you know, that these investigations, if they're going to be involved in the investigative stage, I do believe that there should be a funding component to that, you know, because that type of rigorous work, you know, takes time. And
but I would point out, excuse me, Ms. Queen, I would point out that last time 9 members of this committee voted against the investigative process. So all we're looking at right now is this.
Is the number. It's the number on the Disciplinary Review Board.
Okay.
And
well, we're looking at this whole recommendation, but we're not looking at an investigative component.
Okay, I thought I was responding to Mr. Cozart's point, but maybe I misunderstood it.
Can I ask a quick question, Diane? So on the current board as it is currently organized, the FOP is a voting member of that board, or are they just there to represent the interests of the officer?
There's a voting FOP member.
Yeah.
Of the 7.
Yeah, there's 7 right now, and what we talked about last time was expanding it to 9, with 33 1/3% being citizens. And Ms. Minifield is not sure that's good. She would like to see just under 50% citizens, right?
Well, no, I think if we leave it at 7, you know, and just make the police be less than you know, the 6, because technically the FOP is still the police. So I mean, they just got, you know, more. They at least get some citizens input on there that at least may be able to sway one vote their way. You know,
like to see 3 citizens or 2 out of 7?
I would like 3 citizens. I would like the number to stay the same, 7, which is what it is in the collective bargaining agreement, except it will not be 6 police officers, you know, and then 1 FOP. It will be 3 police officers, 3 citizens, and the 1 FOP.
But the FOP is a police officer, right?
He is a police officer, but that is a specific designation. He doesn't have to be an active duty police officer. He could be a retired police officer. He just has to be a member of the FOP.
His role is different.
And he's appointed by the chief.
Before y'all end the meeting, is there any way to put a percentage on there for Black members on the board? Is that something that can be done?
And that was something we briefly talked about before, and I don't see why that would be a problem.
Well, in my, you know, listening to all the places.
Quality assurance.
And somebody needs to mute their microphone. We're hearing some background noise.
And came in there as a soft.
Okay. Any other comments about this number in paragraph 1? Ms. Gunther, Councilmember Masadi, and Judge Murphy, you are ones who spoke to it earlier.
I like what Diane is suggesting, that not to make this group bigger, but to, you know, define who would be in certain roles. But I also think that we need to see if it is possible that a certain number be of a minority group, as Brandon has suggested.
Well, and Brandon not minority group. I want it Black or African American. Minority is too broad. You might have a Chinese man on there or something that doesn't care anything about Black people or something. So let's keep it to Black and African American if we could.
Judge Murphy, you have any comments about whether we should leave it at 7 or move it up to 9?
I think I ended my conversation last week by saying, I completely agree with what Diane is saying. I want the citizens to be on it that feel as if their vote matters. And so, yes, it would appear if we move it to 9, it would not feel that way to the citizens. So I'm fine with the 3, 3, and 1. My only note is that, again, we're making recommendations, and how they get approved, I guess, is how they get approved. I just, maybe I don't have the faith. As Mr. Dunn has stated, I think we would have to make it I don't know that we could specifically say African-American or Black. I don't know that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't say that. I'm just saying, I don't know if we can denote it to that. When we made we have stated that has been done on other boards, national or statewide, but the statute states make up a minority representation of your community. That's how the state statute is worded. It does not specifically point out a specific minority. So that's just something that we would have to look into the legal language of. I'm not saying
Excuse me, let me just take a quick temperature check. Is there anybody who objects to keeping it at 7, at least 3 of whom would be citizens? Any objection?
No.
Speak up. Okay, we'll keep it at 7 for the purpose of our, and with 3 voting civilian members. That'll go forward that way. Now, with regard to whether we should specify that a certain number should be Black or minority, Black or African American, I'm not getting whether we can actually do that, but we could try. If there's, is there anybody who has an objection to that specification? That, what did you say, Mr. Dunn? How many? 1 or 2? I didn't.
I just think a percentage based on the makeup of the community.
What percentage?
20.
Well, we have 3 members, and so 20% of 3.
So I guess it would be out of 3 members.
At least 1.
At least 1.
Okay, is there any objection to at least us specifying that at least 1 of those shall be Black or African American?
That's what, 35%?
Of the civilians?
Well, it's 1/3, 1 of 3, so yeah. Yeah, any objection to that in our recommendation?
No objection. Hopefully that there would be, that some of the police on there would be African American as well.
Of the citizen, one of the citizens, okay. And then, okay, no objection. All right, it'll go forward like that with regard to that first part. The second part, transparency and disciplinary.
Judge, if I can make one clarification for item number 3 on the first one, says selection of DRB membership should be by public application. Can we clarify that selection of DRB citizen membership? I believe that's what we're speaking to.
Yes, yeah, that's a good idea.
That clerical word.
You agree, Diane, with that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think we've used the word civilian because I think we're all citizens. So I think we use the word civilian.
Civilian, okay, okay.
So Brian, can I ask a question? So like if do you all at the department specify that a percentage, or could you specify that a percentage of the police that would be on the board also be African American?
We are limited with what our command staff currently is as far as administrative. FOP has that opportunity that they could select that as well. So that's kind of where we're at on that.
Okay, what about the next section? I think we've already agreed on the 7 with 3 citizens. Insert that word civilian in paragraph 3, and one of those citizen members should be Black or African American. What about the next section, which is transparency of the disciplinary process? Does anyone object to sending that section forward as a recommendation, as a part of this big recommendation? Okay, it'll go. The next section is what Brianna Persley has worked on. And those last 2 paragraphs are her portion, subject to figuring out where to locate that citizens liaison. Does anyone object to paragraphs 3 and 4? That is complaints within the police department and complaints outside the police department, assisting citizens with a citizens liaison. Any objection? Speak up.
Judge
I don't have
Corsoni
any-
has his hand up.
Judge?
Yeah, I like the work that we've done on this. The one thing that causes me pause here is the notion that the citizen liaison position would be consumed within one of the slots of the Commissioner of Public Safety. The police department is under the Commissioner of Public Safety. And if there's one thing that we're getting from comments from citizenry is that they would like to see somebody involved in these complaints that's outside the realm of the police department. I think if we're going to have confidence that these complaints are going to be taken seriously, I think it's very important that we look to place the citizen liaison person outside of the commissioner's office, outside of the police department. I think the natural place right now would be in the citizens advocate office, which right now it's a part-time position. I don't think that position is swamped because a lot of the complaints are handled by the staff or the council or the mayor's staff. And, with some training and so forth, that position could be enhanced to also include the citizen liaison roles. So I would feel more comfortable if we, instead of creating a citizen liaison position within the commissioner, that we enhance the responsibilities of the Citizens Advocate's Office to include this role.
I would also like to point out that my first take on that citizens advocate after looking at the website was, well, they can't do police investigations, but this is not a police investigation. This is merely assisting people in making complaints. So I agree with Judge Scorsoni that the natural place to look is that citizens advocate place. It's already staffed, and to try to see whether the council would agree to let them assist with these filing of these complaints, and I think the council can say that is not a police investigation. Any other comments on that?
Judge Scorsoni, you intend for them to make the part-time position a full-time position to incorporate those extra duties, correct?
I would suspect that would be necessary. I mean, I have no idea what the workload is right now, but I would suspect that it would probably have to be enhanced.
Yeah.
And that is,
Slotty would probably be better able to address that.
and just so you know, that is in the last recommendation. Sorry, I'm going hoarse, but that is the third funding scenario. So
okay, great. That's
And
great.
I
And
do
I know
think-
you're working on that as we speak, but okay.
And Brianna sent me something earlier today because I think that it got to her because the citizens liaison or citizens advocate or whatever we're going to call it, they asked if that person can also expand, since there's not going to be an investigative group, because they're still, the public's still not happy that they think that it's not going to get done. And so fairly and equitably. So they said, can this citizens advocate, once it gets to the council, assist the council in providing a recommendation to approve or deny what's being presented to them? And at least, because right now they believe or understand that the council pretty much just gets a rubber stamp over what they're told. And so, but the citizens advocate can then at least do a little bit better investigation than what had been provided to the council, since the council seems like they get this really synopsized, type of generic decision, and then they're expected to vote on it pretty quickly. So they're asking, can't the same person then do something on the backside, since they wasn't allowed to get a more independent investigation on the front side?
Well, my understanding is that the parameters of that office are determined by the council, are they not?
I think that's right. Councilmember Sadi, I think, is not on now.
Okay, well, it would seem to me that they redefine the role, and I agree with Ms. Minifield. We need some help in the investigation, and if there are other witnesses, I would see the citizens advocate trying to, you know, get people in to provide the statements that then can be submitted to the integrity unit. So I would hope to see that role kind of enhance into doing some of the work that Ms. Minifield envisioned the citizens advocates doing.
Just wanted to answer the question. I'm sorry for the background noise. Yes, the position is within the council office, and that's who they answer to. They work for the council.
I think it's also in the
Thank you
charter.
for both answers. Ms. Persley, where does that leave us? Would you be willing to accept that last suggestion for an addition, the suggestion Ms. Minifield made?
Yes, and I'll watch this again so I can write it down.
Or you might
Yes.
just talk with her, you know,
Right.
separately, because we can talk individually. We just can't talk as a group.
Will
Okay.
do.
And so again, you're going to make that amendment, but again, any objection to that portion going forward? And I think that completes all of our recommendations. I want to end this meeting by also saying thank you to everyone, including the citizens who have sent us emails. I appreciate everybody's worked so hard on this. And I appreciate the comments, just everything we have done. And I think working together, we've done a pretty good job. I would not, I would say that we might see each other again. Mr. Kozar and I entertain hopes that perhaps we can take another look at this, even if we do so in an informal capacity, because we're also heavily invested in it. And we are meeting with the commission co-chairs. Some of you are laughing as though you don't want to do anything more, but I'm serious. And so we meet with the commission co-chairs on Monday morning, and we probably will be making a recommendation similar to that. Again, thank you for everything. And Ryan Field has just said, enjoyed working with everyone. Mr. Kozar?
Yeah, 90 seconds, because processes and enemies of processes, we have an opportunity coming out of this to make certain that we exemplify what we're seeking to be exemplified in these systems. And if you've observed or if you felt any bias against you, that's an opportunity for this to be addressed. If you felt like you've offended, not just because it was someone that looks like you or does not look like you, we need to reach out one to another. I'm going to reach out, but I shouldn't be the only one reaching out. We need to exemplify. We need to exemplify what we're expecting. And there have been growth opportunities today, but we will dare not let this good work of this group that has happened for the last 6 months be classified by isolated incidents. So I'm trusting that we will all move forward consciously. We do hard work together. When you do hard work together, you have hard conversations. It should forge us together. And that's what we want to happen. So thank each of you.
Wait, I have some more things to say.
Yeah.
Are you finished? Yeah.
I am.
I just have another couple things to say. I do want to remind you that when this goes forward, they're going to ask us for some priorities. I think that Mr. Kozard and I have a pretty good handle on what priorities you think exist. But if you want, you can individually send us an email with your top 3 priorities. And we will just use our discretion about whether we actually limit it to 3, and if so, which 3 we choose. I think it'd be very hard to do so. Secondly, I want to say that you're going to be sending your final version of your recommendation in. If it's a combined recommendation, then we'll all work together to get it in good shape. It goes to Laura Hatfield. She asked that it be a Word document and that each document have as specific a title as necessary. Law enforcement recommendation is not good enough. Justice system recommendation is probably not quite good enough. It needs to be prosecutors or it needs to be courts. And also, please check the citizens' emails. I'll ask Laura to get today's citizen emails to us by noon tomorrow so we can look in the box on the file and see if we need to take anything else into account. Again, thank you for everybody. I'm sorry we ran over today, but we did get through a very tough agenda. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Judge, I had on my calendar that we were meeting Monday. We are not meeting Monday.
We are not meeting Monday. We decided not to meet Monday because we knew it's due on Monday and we are going to be doing some work this weekend.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.